Before I start my presentation, I just want to thank Natalia and Oksana for their kind invitation to join you here in Kiev today and to enjoy your beautiful city. I'm just reflecting on so much of what I've heard so far this morning. One of the things that's very clear to me is there is so much happening here in Ukraine that we in the rest of Europe can learn from. One of the things I very much hope in the future is that we hear very many more Ukrainian voices speaking at conferences around Europe over the next few years, and you're having the chance to share this great experience and these wonderful things you've learnt with the rest of the continent. Thank you also to Natalia for her kind introduction. As she told you, my name is Stephen Duncan. I lead Weber Shandwick's employee engagement practice here in the EMEA region. I spent about 25 years working in what we now call employee engagement, and in the last 3 years I've been working at Weber Shandwick. For those of you who aren't familiar with my organization, we're one of the sort of 3 or 4 biggest communications agencies in the world. We operate in about 88 countries and have offices in about 133 cities, and we've been honored for the last 14 years to partner with Be It here in Ukraine, and that's been a very great partnership for both us and hopefully for Be It also. I'm going to start today with this person. I think most people probably know who this is. There's a little bit of clue there in the photograph. This is Jeff Bezos, Chairman and Chief Executive of Amazon. Now, I really struggle what it's like to be Jeff Bezos. I can't imagine what it's like to start up a company with a few people working in a strip mall in Seattle, selling books online, and turning that into one of the most massive global internet behemoths you can find, which doesn't just sell books to us, but frankly sells pretty much everything that we consume. I certainly can't imagine what it's like to be worth over $50 billion. And I can't imagine what it must be like to have over 200 American cities competing to be the location for my next company headquarters. But I can imagine how Jeff Bezos felt one Saturday morning in 2015 when he opened up his copy of the New York Times and read this headline: "Inside Amazon, wrestling big ideas in a bruising workplace." I think many people probably saw this. For 4 or 5 days, this story captivated the media. It led news programs, it created headlines for newspapers, not just in the US, but all around the world. And there was nothing that Amazon could do, nothing Jeff Bezos could say, nothing that their corporate communications team could do, nothing that their PR agency could do to turn this story around. But then after 4 or 5 days, something happened. The story turned. And the reason the story turned was because of one viral LinkedIn story. One story written by a person called Nick Chiyobaratu. Nick is a middle manager who works inside Amazon. And when he read that story in the New York Times, he was really distressed because this didn't describe the company that he knew and he loved. And so he wrote this piece on LinkedIn the same evening, and he shared it with all his friends, all his connections on LinkedIn. And they shared it with their friends, and they shared it with their friends and their friends. And before we know it, millions of people around the world had seen this story. And then the news outlets started to pick up on this as well. And suddenly the story about Amazon as this terrible place to work became balanced with a different point of view, a point of view from somebody inside the organization. He was interviewed a little bit later and asked, if someone asked if I had contacted PR ahead of time and if I'd seen the social media guidelines, his answers were no and yes. And I often wonder if he had gone to the PR team and said, look, I'm really upset about this. I want to get out there and put my point of view. I suspect what their answer would have been. They said, no, you're an amateur. Leave this to us professionals. The professionals were failing. The amateur succeeded. And in all probability, with what he did, he broke every guideline that Amazon has about employees talking on social media. Why did he do it? He wrote the article because it was the right thing to do. Why did he turn the tide? Why did the actions of this one employee turn the story around for Amazon? For me, I think it boils down to one simple fact, that our trust in leaders and in corporations has never been lower. Many of you will be familiar with the trust barometer that my colleagues at Edelman produce every year. And they've been tracking for about 10 years, who do we trust? And one of the things that comes through very clearly in that is we don't trust CEOs, we don't trust corporate websites, we don't trust the spokespeople that are put up in front of the media. And this was the challenge that Amazon faced. They were trying to respond to this crisis through all those traditional media. And it pointed out to me the fact that organizations, not just Amazon, but all organizations, have never been more exposed than they are today. You've got activist investors out there speculating in your shares. You've got the media presenting the very worst of every organization. You've got pressure groups who don't only target your organization, but target your partners, target your customers. We've got hackers out there who will do everything they can to get access to your data and then to share that with the world. We've got regulators who are very happy to pick over every single thing your organization does and to share that with the world also. And then we have the behavior of leaders themselves, leaders who don't necessarily set examples which those employees who work in their organizations would be very happy to be shared outside. And employees themselves. Some of you may remember this lady, Sharon Watkins, who was the lady who blew the whistle on Enron over 15 years ago, which actually brought that organization down. Or this poor man here, this is the head of HR at Air France, leaving a meeting with employees of that organization, probably wishing that he'd done a level 4 good morning instead of the level 1 that he actually gave them. But reflecting the breakdown in the relationships in that organization between employers and leaders. And lastly, the increasing prevalence of platforms like Glassdoor.com and other types of social media where employees can air very publicly how they feel about your organization, for better or for worse. So for all of these regions, organizations' reputations have never been more fragile, have never been more at risk, and have never needed more support and protection than they have today. Whereas an organization's culture used to be something that we experienced behind closed doors, increasingly we find this on the front page of our newspapers or being talked about online and in the news media. But one thing remains the same. We continue to trust people we know. We trust our friends. We trust our family. We trust the people that we have made acquaintances with and built relationships with. And this is why Nick saved Amazon. Because his message was spread not from a corporate website or from a corporate spokesperson. It was spread virally amongst friends and family, sharing it with their friends and family. People believed what he said because it came from someone that we already trust. And in time, that trust in Nick and his friends and their friends, which ultimately might be one of my friends, is how Nick saved Amazon. I've often wondered what his annual performance appraisal looked like that year. List your top 3 achievements for the year, and maybe 1 or 2 could have, I made an incremental improvement in this, and then item number 3, I saved my company. I sincerely hope he got a good rating in 2015 when he took his action. The question I want to ask today is, where in your organizations are your Nicks, and your Marias, and your Natalias, and your Yuris? Where are the people in your organization who, when time is required of them, they will become your advocates, the people that you can turn to, not just to defend your organization, but to support it in many other ways? Now, this question of employee advocacy is something that we at Weber Shandwick have been looking at for several years. In 2016, we published our first research in this area called Employees Rising, Seizing the Opportunity in Employee Activism, and I'll draw on some of that research today. And we're just about to publish our follow-up to that research, Employer Branding, the Credibility Gap, which we'll be publishing next week. And I'll actually give you a little bit of a preview to some of our findings in that research a little later in my presentation. And what these two bits of research have done is allowed us to really explore this area. And what I'd like to do today is share a little bit of that insight with you, but then help you with what you can do as Ukraine's leading employers to actually start turning more of your employees into advocates. And 3 or 4 steps that you can take that would really help improve advocacy and activism amongst your employee base. In our original research, we found out that 88% of people, and this was a global study, so looking at people all around the world, actively use social media outside work. And of those people, around 50% have already posted something about their employers. So whether you're asking your people to be out there and to talk about your organization or not, they're already doing this. They're already out there sharing stories, sharing news, sharing images, sharing films potentially that in some way involve their experience as your employee. And of those people, 39% are sharing positive comments, actually saying good things about your organization. But there's a proportion, about 16%, who are actually sharing negative comments. And when you add that up, it obviously comes to more than 50%, which is because some people do both, who aren't consistently positive or consistently negative, who respond to the events that they see around them. And there's many people who actually have posted something and then regretted it and wish they hadn't put it out there. So regardless of whether you are actively pursuing a strategy of employee advocacy today, the fact is that many of your employees are already very active out there advocating on your behalf, but potentially also saying things that you wouldn't want put into the public domain. We kind of broke people down into 6 categories, what we call pre-activists, proactivists. Those are the people that are out there being positive on your behalf. Proactivists being people that probably just need a little bit more of a nudge to become much more active on your behalf. Then there are 13% of people who are actively detractors. And then other categories of people who, again, with a little bit of nudging, we can move towards that very positive proactivist and pre-activist category. And what are we asking these advocates to do? Some of them are doing what Nick was doing, defending their organization. And just before the break, Alan and Robin were talking about some of you who in the past have defended your organizations. But also we're asking them to go out there and to engage with our stakeholders, to help to tell our company's story to all those people outside our organization, whether it's customers or clients, regulators, government, pressure groups, non-profits, all those others that we interact with in society, to help to share our story with them. At times, we want our employees' help to promote our brands, to promote our products, to promote our services. And lastly, we want their help to amplify all those other things that we're already doing. I can't imagine there are many organizations in the room that don't have very active social media programs. And if we can get our employees to also participate in that, they can do so much to amplify the efforts that you're already making. And this isn't just on social media, although we focus a lot on getting people to share things on Twitter and LinkedIn and elsewhere. Actually, it's as important that when we come to events like this, or when we meet with our friends, or we meet with our neighbors, equally those messages about our organization are being shared. So social media is important, but that's not the only platform in which we want people to share what's good about your organization and to share that with all those that they know. But social media is so important these days. So I want to share with you just a little example, a case study of a client that we've been working with since we published this research. I think most of you will be familiar with Novartis, one of the larger pharmaceutical companies in the world, based in Switzerland. They read our research. They were a client we were working with before this. They read our research, and this really intrigued them. They wanted to find out more about whether they could make advocacy work for them. And the way this worked, and I'll talk about this a little more later, was they gathered lots of existing content, lots of materials, both stories, films, and other things, and curated some really great content that they wanted their people to share. They created an advocacy platform, a way that made it easy for people to actually then share that content, and then they made that accessible to the people inside their organization, asking them to share that with their own personal networks using the channels that they use, things like Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn. And we spent a lot of time tracking what happened when we put that content out there. Now, as you can imagine, and you've probably been through similar experiences yourself, there's a lot of people we had to convince to get permission to do this, particularly in a Swiss company, which is known for being quite secretive in the way they do business, and in a pharmaceutical company, which is probably the most regulated industry that you will find anywhere. So we had to talk to leaders. We had to talk to the people that own social media channels. We had to talk to all those layers of governments that control their organization. We spent weeks talking to their IT and their security folks about how this would impact their infrastructure and the mitigating their fears about the risks that this would create for all the other platforms that they use. And we spent more time than I like to remember talking to their lawyers and their compliance people about how this wouldn't put their organization at risk. And it wasn't a straightforward process. Often some of the objections that we got from, say, the legal team or the security folks meant we had to go back to leaders. So over 6 months, we spent weeks and weeks and days and hours talking with people about how we would make this platform deliver for them in ways which would actually help their business. And after those 6 months, we got permission to do a pilot study. And in that pilot study, we got 100 people from across the Novartis organization to take part, to use this platform. And over 3 months, the content that they shared got over 1 million impressions with people in the real world. To put that into some kind of context, if Novartis had said to us as an agency, we want to do a campaign on LinkedIn, we want it to reach 1 million people, the cost, just the cost that you would have paid LinkedIn for that is somewhere in the region of 50,000 euros. So if you annualize that, what those 100 people were able to achieve without any payment is equivalent to about 200,000 euros worth of investment by Novartis. And those 100 people represent less than 1/10 of 1% of the people in Novartis. So if you scale that up, and that's what we are doing at the moment, we're now rolling this out to over 26,000 people, the equivalent value of all the sharing that they are making is equivalent to about 56 million euros worth of investment. So huge impact for them. And we're measuring that in a variety of different ways, not just the consumption of content, although it's been really interesting for us to see what kind of content is it that people are interested in. And we use that data to then fine-tune the content that we're curating and making available to people on an ongoing basis. We find that video is very powerful, so we've created a lot more video content than we had before. Stories about patients and how Novartis helps patients cope with the everyday lives dealing with conditions like multiple sclerosis or eczema and other things, again, very powerful. So we're using that data to really fine-tune the content that we make available on this platform. And what we're seeing is massive increased reach for Novartis amongst those stakeholder groups that they particularly want to target. We see Novartis' name as we do research into who's saying what about those conditions. Instead of being maybe the 15th and 16th organization in those conversations, we see them moving up to the very top of the leadership on those issues, and their brand reputation increasing. And also, for those people that are taking part in this, much greater engagement. We're actually seeing them even more committed to Novartis as an organization. And I think this comes down in many respects to the trust that Novartis is placing in them. They're actually saying to people, we trust you to do the right thing with this content. And as Arlette was saying in her presentation this morning, trust is so important to making us happy at work. This is part of how we achieve that. So what this Novartis example, what this pilot did for Novartis, and what I think Novartis should do for others, is show that employee advocates really can help your business. So the question for you and the question for other organizations around the world is what's stopping you? So why aren't we all simply going out there and investing in this type of approach? I'm going to take you through what I think are the 4 barriers to preventing advocacy and hopefully give you some ideas around how you can maybe overcome those so that you yourself can do even more to engage your advocates that already exist within your organizations. The first thing is that advocates are people who are already engaged. Sometimes when I talk to clients about this, they say, oh, this would be a fantastic way to increase our engagement. Our people aren't very happy today. If we do this, then this will make them more engaged. But actually, that doesn't work. You know, advocates are people that are already engaged with your organization. Advocacy is one of the things that people do to actually use up that discretionary effort, which we sometimes talk about people who are engaged with their organization having. So the thing that you have to think about first is, you know, if you want engaged advocates, you need to have engaged employees. And the way that you get an engaged workforce is by delivering on a great employee experience. We talked this morning about happiness. And many of the things that Arlette talked about, I really subscribe to very strongly. We've been using this model of employee experience for a number of years at Weber Shandwick to help you understand, you know, what it is as an organization you need to do to actually create great employee experiences. And many of the things that Arlette talked about, I think, are what we would call the basics. But the impact of the basics on your organization in many occasions doesn't increase engagement or doesn't improve the employee experience. Frankly, if you're doing those things, those are the things that people expect. And these are the things which, if you do, often you'll get no credit for as an employer. But when you don't do them, that's when you start to see morale and engagement diminishing very quickly. And the sorts of the things that we mean there are creating a psychologically safe environment for people to work in. Actually, they can come to work and they know that that's a safe place to operate. We've talked at length today about the importance of line management, and I can't understate how important that is. And, you know, again, some, I think, really interesting discussion earlier about what we should be expecting from line managers. There's a truism which I think is absolutely right, that people don't leave companies, they leave managers. And if you can't deliver good line management to people, well, you shouldn't expect your best people to choose to stay with you. But also, not just about managers, also about all those other peers that we work with, and making sure that we've got people in our organization that we like, we respect, that we enjoy spending 8, 9, 10 hours a day with. And obviously we have to be very fair in the way that we pay and reward people. So those are the basics, and then there are other things that we call drivers, which, you know, again, if you do those things well, then you start to get credit. Then people start to have a great experience. They start to really enjoy working in your organization. But equally, the risk with some of those things is that if you do those things badly, if you're really bad at giving developmental opportunities to people, whether it's training or promotion, that can be very disengaging for folks. And then the final category of things, those things that takes good companies and makes them great employers, are things like giving people the autonomy and the involvement in your business that actually makes them feel like they have real ownership in what you're doing. So the first question you've got to ask yourself, if you're interested in employee advocacy, is, are we giving our people a great experience? And if the answer to that is no, then that's the thing you have to fix first. You have to get that experience right. If you get that experience right, then the outcome that you'll receive at the end of the day is a really, really engaged workforce. We started off the day with this quote from attributed to Peter Drucker, although there's a lot of debate about who actually said this. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I think that's as true with a strategy around employee advocacy as anything else. If the culture of your organization is not right, then it doesn't matter what you would like the organization to be doing in this area, it simply won't be successful. So how are we doing as a kind of global network of employers, how are we doing at employing or engaging our workers? That brings me to the research, which we're officially publishing next Friday, called The Employer Brand Credibility Gap, Bridging the Divide. And one of the things that we found in that is that global employee engagement is sitting at 27%, which is pretty disappointing and aligns quite closely with similar numbers and similar research that you'll have seen from people like Gallup. The reasons that it's so bad, the things that we could predict: poor work-life balance, the impact of competition and the need, therefore, to cut costs and to find better, more efficient ways of working. The demands of dealing with customers and clients every day, who themselves are facing all kinds of different pressures. And the pace of change, which always seems to accelerate, never seems to slow down. And part of that also, the introduction of new technologies. All of these are what are driving engagement to the levels that we see today. And one of the other really startling facts that we uncovered whilst doing that research is that only 19% of employees actually believe what their companies say about themselves, which I think is really indicative of kind of where that relationship between employers and employees is today. So there is much that we have to do to engage our people. But I'm sure as Ukraine's leading employers, many of you actually have a much better story to tell than that. So the second thing that you want to do, and hopefully the starting place for many in this room, is to actually make it clear to people you want them to be advocates. For me, whenever I go and speak to a client about this subject, and if they're asking for advice on how to increase the level of advocacy in their business, the place I always start is looking at their social media policies. And it's amazing how many of these are written with a view that says, actually, the last thing we want any employee ever to do is to share anything on social media. A little bit like the Amazon policy, which Nick broke when he saved the company. So the first thing that I'm really keen that employers do is to think about, how do we actually engage with our people, encourage them to be advocates, to rewrite a lot of their social media policies in a way which really encourages people to use social, which are grounded in an assumption of trust, that our people are smart and they know how to do the right thing with the content we'll share with them. To focus on what we want people to do, not just what we don't want them to do. And to make sure that if our strategy is to engage employees and to get employees to work on our behalf, if that's what our strategy is, that the policy itself reflects that. And lastly, how do we make clear to our employees what's in it for me? Why should employees care about that? And really helping them with why being an advocate isn't just good for the business, but it's good for them as individuals also. The third thing that I ask employers to do is to make it easy to be an advocate. And the secret to this, and this is one of the things that Novartis did and most of the other organizations we're helping with in this area are doing, is finding the right platform for their employees to be advocates on. Now, there are a very wide range of different advocacy platforms out there. Some of these are very familiar, things like LinkedIn or Facebook, which we're all, I think, familiar with. But then some more specialist platforms like VoiceStream from Dynamic Signal or Hootsuite, which are really specifically designed to act as platforms for employee advocacy, which do a great job of curating that content, of making it easy for people to connect that then to their personal profiles and whatever social media channels they use. And make it very straightforward for people then, when they see something they're interested in, they see something they want to share, just with 1 or 2 clicks, to actually then publish that on their own platforms. Now, I'm not going to endorse any one of these platforms. I've worked with Dynamic Signal at Novartis and with some other accounts, but I'm using Hootsuite with Takeda. I've used Social Chorus in Nestle. They're all good and they all have their strengths. And as employers, you will find the right platform for you. What there isn't any problem with is any shortage of options. There's probably about 40 or 50 of these platforms out there today. One of those will be the right mix of features for your business. And then the final thing is giving your advocates great content. One of the things that you're doing when you're an advocate is you're linking your name and your reputation online with the content that you're sharing. So the content that you give people to share as an advocate needs to be great. It needs to be something that they will be proud to be associated with. You need to think hard about what kinds of platform do your people use. And it's worth doing a little bit of research. Are your people on LinkedIn? Are they on Facebook? Are they on Pinterest? Are they on Instagram? Or there may be other very specific social media platforms that are unique to Ukraine or unique to particular industry segments that you're in. So understanding where your people are, but equally importantly, understanding where the people you want to reach. If you want to do a consumer campaign, you want to reach people, women perhaps in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, a campaign that's purely based around certain channels may not reach them, but a campaign on Pinterest, for example, may be the ideal way to actually get to them. So as you do your employee advocacy, you need to think really hard about where are the people we want to reach and make sure that in the way that you create your advocacy platforms, you've got a means of actually reaching the people that are important to you. And then understand what works on those different channels. Simply taking a press release and asking people to publish that, or your most recent 30-second television advert and saying, could you share this with the world, may not work. One of the things that we know about Facebook, for example, is that if you don't hook people in the first kind of second or so of the video, they'll never stay with it. They might not even view it in the first place. So think about how you create content that's specifically designed for those different platforms is really, really important. And if you want people, for example, using Instagram, making sure you've got great imagery that will really stand out from the crowd that's already out there. And there are many different platforms out there, each of which have their own rules, each of which you should be thinking hard about. How do we create content for YouTube or Snapchat? Thinking really hard about what it is that makes content work on there, and then delivering that content to your people so that they then can share it with all those stakeholders you want to reach. So those are my 4 steps for creating employee advocacy. Simply stated, it starts by engaging your people. And once you've got that engaged workforce, then telling them that you really want them to do this for you. You want them to be advocates. They have permission, and that you really want them out there talking about you, defending your organization, promoting your story, engaging with your stakeholders, and helping to amplify the things that you're already doing. Equipping them with the platform that will make it easy for them to be advocates. And lastly, giving them that great content, which then they'll be really proud to share and to be associated with. I'm going to finish there, because I think my time is up. But thank you all very much for listening so attentively. If anyone has any questions, I'd be very happy to answer those now.
Do we have questions to Stephen? Thank you very much for recommendations and provoke. Oh, we do have a question. Hold on.
Hello. Sorry for interruption. Thank you so much for the great presentation, and I really love your way of expressing the thoughts and sharing the content. I have a question regarding this 100 employees from Novartis. So how the communication with them were built? Because I think that it needs to be truth. It needs to be real believers in employer in order to be further promoters. Because if not truth in place, it's only advertising. So thank you.
So in terms of the people we selected for the pilot, we wanted to find a fairly representative cross-section of people around their organization. They've got obviously very different specialisms, very different professions within Novartis, and we wanted those all to be represented. So we worked with their HR teams around the world to identify people, but on a fairly random basis. And we sent out invitations to, I think, I remember off the top of my head, I think it was about 400 people saying, we'd like you to take part, but that was fairly randomly. And then from that, depending on whether people said, yes, we want to take part or not, we were able to identify the 100 people that we turned into our ambassadors who took part in that pilot program. So, your point is right, and I think it illustrates what I'm saying more generally, which is the people that are doing this for you, you want those to be your engaged employees. You can't, if you ask people who are not engaged to do this, most of the time they simply won't do anything, and they simply won't do anything that's helpful to your organization. So engagement comes first, but once you've got that, then advocacy will build on that. So, I think it's a very good point. You do want people that are engaged and committed. That way you'll have the biggest impact with the advocacy programs that you run.